together in one room, not for a funeral, not for a war council, but for a birth after centuries of colonial division, after decades of Cold War manipulation, after countless attempts at unity that crumbled into dust. Africa is trying something it has never successfully done before. One continent, one voice, one future. But here's what they don't tell you. This wasn't the first attempt. It wasn't even the second. And the man who dreamed it up, he was killed for it. What you're about to discover is the hidden story of Africa's most ambitious project since independence. A story of visionaries and dictators, of hope and betrayal, of a continent trying to heal itself while the world watches and waits for it to fail. This is the untold story of the African Union. Welcome to Africa Hidden History. I am your guide through one of the most significant moments in modern African history. A moment that gets barely a footnote in world history books, but represents something profound: Africa's attempt to reclaim its destiny. Today, we are diving deep into the formation of the African Union in 2002. But this isn't just a story about politicians signing documents. This is a story about identity, about what it means to be African in a world that divided your continent with rulers and pens, about whether 50+ nations, each with their own languages, cultures, and conflicts, can truly become one. We'll take you back to the roots of Pan-Africanism. We'll walk through the failed experiments that came before. We'll introduce you to the dreamers and the cynics, the revolutionaries and the compromises, and we'll reveal the hidden forces both inside and outside Africa that shaped this continental union. By the end of this documentary, you'll understand why the African Union was born from the ashes of a failed organization, how Libya's controversial leader became its greatest champion, what secrets and struggles marked its creation, and most importantly, whether it's actually working. Because here's the truth most people miss. The African Union isn't just about politics. It's about post-colonial healing. It's about whether Africa can write its own story or whether it will forever be written by others. Let's go back to where it all began. The year is 2002. The world is reeling from September 11th. America has invaded Afghanistan. The war on terror dominates global headlines. In this new world order, Africa is once again being overlooked. But if you zoom into the African continent itself, you see something different. You see a continent in transition. Apartheid has been dead for less than a decade. Nelson Mandela is no longer president, but his rainbow nation dream still echoes. Zimbabwe is descending into chaos under Robert Mugabe. Sierra Leone is emerging from a brutal civil war. Rwanda is still counting its dead from the 1994 genocide. This is a continent carrying the weight of its recent past. Colonial borders drawn by Europeans in the 1880s still divide ethnic groups and create tension. The Cold War has ended, but its proxy conflicts left Africa littered with weapons and fractured governments. To understand why the African Union matters, we must understand what colonialism did to Africa. Before European colonization, Africa had kingdoms, empires, trade networks. From the Mali Empire to the Kingdom of Congo, from Great Zimbabwe to the Ashanti Confederacy, Africa governed itself. Then came the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. 13 European nations and the United States sat in a room in Germany and carved up Africa like a birthday cake. No Africans were invited. No African voices were heard. They drew straight lines across maps, cutting through ethnic territories, separating families, creating artificial nations. The scramble for Africa wasn't just about taking land, it was about erasing African identity and replacing it with European control. By 1914, only 2 African nations remained independent, Ethiopia and Liberia. The rest were colonies ruled by foreigners, their resources extracted, their people subjugated. But colonialism did something else. It planted an idea in the minds of Africans. Maybe our artificial divisions make us weak. Maybe our unity is our strength. The dream of African unity didn't start in Africa. It started in the diaspora. In the late 1800s and the early 1900s, enslaved Africans and their descendants in the Americas began asking dangerous questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? What connects us? Leaders like Marcus Garvey in Jamaica, W.E.B. Du Bois in America, and George Padmore in Trinidad started preaching a radical idea. All people of African descent share a common struggle. And that struggle requires unity. They called it Pan-Africanism, the belief that Africa and its scattered children must unite politically, economically, spiritually to resist oppression and reclaim dignity. By the 1945 Pan-African Congress in Manchester, England, African leaders on the continent itself were joining the movement. Future presidents like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya attended. They made a declaration. Colonial rule must end. African independence must begin. And when it does, Africans must unite. Between 1957 and 1975, the map of Africa transformed. One by one, colonies became countries. Ghana became independent in 1957 under Nkrumah's leadership. Then Guinea, then Nigeria, then Congo. By 1960, known as the Year of Africa, 17 nations gained independence. But independence exposed a harsh truth. Political freedom doesn't equal economic freedom. The colonial powers left, but they took everything with them. Infrastructure, institutions, trained professionals, gone. What remained were artificial borders, ethnic tensions, and economies designed to serve European industries, not African needs. The new African leaders faced an impossible question. How do we build nations from the ruins of colonialism? Nkrumah had an answer: unite. Not 50 separate weak nations, but one strong continental government. He famously said, "We must unite now or perish." He envisioned the United States of Africa, one currency, one military, one government. But other leaders weren't ready. They had just won their independence. They weren't eager to surrender it to some supranational authority. The debate came to a head in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in May 1963. 32 newly independent African nations gathered. Two camps emerged. The Casablanca group, led by Nkrumah and including radical leaders like Egypt's Nasser and Guinea's Sékou Touré, pushed for immediate political union, strong centralized power. The Monrovia group, led by more cautious leaders like Nigeria's Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and Ethiopia's Haile Selassie, wanted cooperation, not integration. They believed in sovereignty first, unity second. The Monrovia group won. On May 25, 1963, they formed the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. Its mandate was noble: promote solidarity, coordinate development, eradicate colonialism, defend sovereignty, and promote international cooperation. But here's what was missing: teeth. The OAU had no real power. It couldn't intervene in conflicts. It couldn't punish dictators. It operated on the principle of non-interference. Each nation was sacred and untouchable. For nearly 4 decades, the OAU would struggle with this fundamental weakness. It watched as coups destroyed governments. It stood silent as genocides unfolded. It became, in the eyes of many critics, a club for dictators to protect each other. By the 1990s, Africa was in crisis, and the OAU seemed powerless to respond. If you want to understand the African Union, you must understand Muammar Gaddafi. The Libyan leader was one of Africa's most controversial figures. To the West, he was a terrorist sponsor, a madman, a dictator. To many Africans, he was something else, a benefactor, a Pan-Africanist, a leader who put Africa first. Gaddafi came to power in Libya in 1969 through a military coup. He immediately positioned himself as a revolutionary, anti-Western, anti-imperialist, pro-Arab, and increasingly pro-African. By the 1990s, Libya was under international sanctions for its alleged role in terrorist attacks, including the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. Isolated by the West, Gaddafi turned to Africa. He poured Libyan oil money into African development projects. He funded infrastructure, schools, telecommunications. He championed the idea that Africa needed economic independence from former colonial powers. But Gaddafi's supporter came with strings. He was accused of interfering in African conflicts, supporting rebels, and destabilizing governments that opposed him. His vision for African unity was ambitious but autocratic. He wanted a United States of Africa with himself as a leading figure. In 1999, Gaddafi issued the Sirte Declaration calling for the OAU to be transformed into a more powerful African Union. He used his oil wealth and political influence to push reluctant African leaders toward this vision. Without Gaddafi, there might be no African Union. But his involvement also raised questions. Whose dream was this, really? And what would happen when he was gone? South Africa's Thabo Mbeki was Gaddafi's opposite. Intellectual, where Gaddafi was impulsive; diplomatic, where Gaddafi was confrontational. Mbeki represented a different vision for Africa's future. As deputy president and then president of South Africa, Mbeki championed the African Renaissance, a belief that Africa could rise through good governance, democracy, and self-reliance. He was a product of the anti-apartheid struggle, educated in exile, trained in strategy and patience. Mbeki pushed for the new partnership for Africa's development, NEPAD, an economic plan that promised African-led development in exchange for improved governance. While Gaddafi threw money at problems, Mbeki negotiated structures and institutions. Together, these two very different leaders would shape the African Union, one providing resources and revolutionary energy, the other providing legitimacy and diplomatic skill. Not all key players were individuals, some were groups. The frontline states, nations like Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Botswana had fought together against colonialism and apartheid. They had experience cooperating across borders for liberation. They understood that Africa's problems required African solutions. Leaders like Tanzania's Julius Nyerere had been champions of Pan-Africanism since the 1960s. Though Nyerere had retired by 2002, his influence lived on. He had proven that African unity wasn't just theoretical, it could be practical, especially in the face of common enemies. But not everyone believed in the African Union dream. Some leaders saw it as a threat to their power. Others saw it as an expensive distraction from real problems. Nations like Nigeria and Egypt, giants of African politics, worried about losing influence in a united structure. Smaller nations feared being dominated by larger, wealthier neighbors. Outside Africa, Western powers watched nervously. A truly united Africa could challenge the post-colonial economic order. It could control its own resources, set its own terms, resist external manipulation. France, Britain, and the United States had spent decades maintaining influence through bilateral relationships with individual African nations. A strong African Union could change everything. The formation of the AU wasn't just an internal African affair. It was geopolitics, a power struggle over who would control Africa's future. To understand why the African Union was necessary, we must understand why the OAU failed. The Organization of African Unity began with high hopes. Its charter promised solidarity and coordination, but almost immediately cracks appeared. In 1967, the Biafran War erupted in Nigeria. The southeastern region attempted to secede, leading to a brutal 3-year conflict that killed over 1 million people, mostly through starvation. The OAU did nothing. Its principle of non-interference meant it couldn't take sides, couldn't intervene, couldn't save lives. In Uganda, Idi Amin launched one of Africa's most brutal dictatorships in the 1970s. He killed an estimated 300,000 people. The OAU remained silent. Why? Because Amin was a head of state, and the OAU protected heads of state, no matter their crimes. In 1994, Rwanda descended into genocide. In just 100 days, approximately 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were slaughtered. The OAU issued statements but took no action. It had no mechanisms for intervention, no peacekeeping forces, no authority to stop member states from committing atrocities. Again and again, the pattern repeated. Crisis emerges, OAU discusses, nothing happens. Critics called it the Dictators' Club. Leaders who committed human rights abuses in their own countries were welcomed at OAU summits. The organization seemed more interested in protecting sovereignty than protecting people. But the 1990s brought transformation. The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union collapsed. The artificial divisions that had defined African politics for decades, capitalist versus communist, East versus West, suddenly meant nothing. At the same time, a new generation of African leaders emerged. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, who brought moral authority. Leaders like Uganda's Yoweri Museveni and Ethiopia's Meles Zenawi, who talked about self-reliance and good governance. They looked at the OAU and saw failure. They asked hard questions. Why can't we stop wars? Why can't we promote democracy? Why are we still so dependent on foreign aid and foreign intervention? In 1999, the OAU finally acknowledged its own inadequacy. At the Algiers summit, African leaders admitted that the organization needed fundamental reform. The world was changing. Africa needed to change with it. Enter Muammar Gaddafi. In September 1999, Gaddafi hosted an extraordinary OAU summit in Sirte, Libya. This wasn't a regular meeting, it was a call to revolution. Gaddafi made his case. The OAU is broken, it has failed to prevent conflicts, failed to promote development, failed to give Africa a voice in global affairs. He proposed something radical. Dissolve the OAU and create a new organization. A United States of Africa with supranational powers, a continental government, a single military, one economic union. The proposal shocked many leaders. It was Nkrumah's dream reborn, but 40 years later, and from a controversial messenger. Some leaders were enthusiastic, others were horrified, but everyone agreed on one thing. The status quo wasn't working. The Sirte Declaration was adopted. It called for the establishment of an African Union, but the details were left vague. What powers would it have? How would it be structured? Would it respect sovereignty or override it? The debate had begun. Between 1999 and 2001, African diplomats worked to hammer out the details. Two visions competed. Gaddafi's vision, strong central authority, immediate political integration, United States of Africa. Mbeki and others' vision, gradual integration, focus on economic development, respect for sovereignty with limited exceptions. The negotiations were intense. Smaller nations feared domination. Larger nations feared losing control. Some leaders genuinely believed in unity. Others saw it as a way to maintain their own power with a new institutional shield. Compromises were made. The African Union would be stronger than the OAU. It would have the right to intervene in grave circumstances like genocide, but it wouldn't be a superstate. Nations would retain sovereignty. It would promote economic integration through the African Economic Community, but it wouldn't force political union. It would have a Peace and Security Council to address conflicts, but interventions would require consensus. In July 2000 in Lomé, Togo, the Constitutive Act of the African Union was adopted. 49 countries signed it. 1 year later, after 2/3 had ratified it, it entered into force. The African Union was real. July 9th, 2002, Durban, South Africa. The world watched as the Organization of African Unity held its final summit. That evening, it would officially dissolve. In its place, the African Union would be born. The symbolism was powerful. South Africa, once the continent's shame, the last bastion of white minority rule, was now its shining hope. Nelson Mandela, though retired, attended. Thabo Mbeki, as host, welcomed leaders from across the continent. 53 nations were represented, from tiny island nations like Seychelles to continental giants like Nigeria and Egypt, from democracies to dictatorships, from the wealthiest to the poorest. At midnight, the OAU banner was lowered. The AU flag, green with a golden map of Africa surrounded by stars, was raised. Speeches were made. Gaddafi called it Africa's moment. Mbeki spoke of renaissance and renewal. Alpha Oumar Konaré of Mali became the AU's first chairperson. But beneath the celebration, questions lingered. Would this new organization be different? Could Africa truly unite? Or was this just the OAU with a new name? The African Union was immediately tested. In 2003, conflict erupted in Darfur, Sudan. The Sudanese government launched a campaign of violence against African ethnic groups. Hundreds of thousands died. The AU faced its first major crisis. Unlike the OAU, the AU acted. It deployed the African Union mission in Sudan amidst 7,000 peacekeepers sent to protect civilians. For the first time, African soldiers were intervening in an African conflict under African command. But AMI struggled. Underfunded, under-equipped, and understaffed, the mission couldn't stop the violence. Eventually, the United Nations took over. The Darfur intervention showed both the AU's ambition and its limitations. It wanted to solve African problems with African solutions, but without sufficient resources, political will, or military capacity, it couldn't. Other challenges emerged. Burundi descended into civil war. The AU deployed peacekeepers, again underfunded and overwhelmed. Togo experienced a constitutional crisis. The AU suspended Togo until democratic order was restored, a move the OAU never would have made. Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe presided over economic collapse and political violence. The AU issued statements but took no real action, revealing that old habits died hard. While peacekeeping grabbed headlines, the real work of the AU happened in meeting rooms and policy documents. The African Union wasn't just one institution, it was a system. The assembly of heads of state and government, the supreme decision-making body. The Executive Council of Foreign Ministers implementing decisions, the Pan-African Parliament representing Africa's people, though with limited powers. The Peace and Security Council responsible for conflict prevention and intervention. The African Court on Human and People's Rights enforcing human rights standards. The African Union Commission, the administrative bureaucracy running day-to-day operations, regional economic communities, building blocks for continental integration. Each institution faced challenges. The Pan-African Parliament struggled with legitimacy because most members were appointed, not elected. The Peace and Security Council lacked funding for its ambitious mandate. The Commission in Addis Ababa was plagued by bureaucracy and inefficiency, but slowly structures took shape. Protocols were signed, norms were established. The African Union began developing its own identity, separate from the Organization of African Unity's legacy. One of the AU's most ambitious goals was economic integration. Africa in 2002 was economically fragmented. 53 currencies, 53 sets of trade regulations, 53 different customs systems. Moving goods across African borders was often harder than shipping them to Europe. The AU inherited the African Economic Community framework from the OAU, which envisioned 6 stages of integration culminating in a single African common market by 2028. Regional economic communities like ECOWAS in West Africa, SADC in Southern Africa, and EAC in East Africa were meant to be building blocks. First, integrate regionally, then connect the regions, finally create one African market. Progress was slow. Regional communities competed with each other. Member states belonged to multiple communities with overlapping mandates. Protectionism remained strong. Leaders wanted to protect local industries, but there were victories. The African Union launched the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, where countries voluntarily submitted to reviews of their governance, encouraging accountability. NEPAD, Thabo Mbeki's economic initiative, became integrated into AU structures, coordinating infrastructure projects across borders. Plans for the African Continental Free Trade Area, FCFTA, began taking shape, a project that wouldn't be realized until 2019, but had its roots in these early AU years. One area where the AU tried to distinguish itself from the OAU was governance. The Constitutive Act included a groundbreaking provision: unconstitutional changes of government would not be tolerated. If a military coup overthrew a democratically elected leader, the AU would suspend that country. This was revolutionary. The OAU had accepted coups as a fact of African politics. The AU declared them unacceptable. Between 2002 and 2010, the AU suspended multiple countries: Central African Republic after a coup in 2003, Mauritania after a coup in 2005 and again in 2008, Guinea after a coup in 2008, Madagascar after an unconstitutional power transition in 2009. Suspension meant exclusion from AU meetings and potential sanctions. Sometimes it worked. Pressure forced restoration of constitutional order. Sometimes it didn't. Suspended countries simply waited out the AU, but the message was clear. The AU was trying to promote democratic norms, yet contradictions remained. Countries with authoritarian leaders, Gaddafi's Libya, Mugabe's Zimbabwe, Mubarak's Egypt, were full AU members in good standing because they hadn't come to power through coups. The AU could punish unconstitutional changes, but it struggled to address ongoing repression. Critics accused the AU of selective enforcement, quick to condemn coups but slow to challenge entrenched dictators. Here's what almost no one talks about. Who paid for the African Union? The answer is uncomfortable. Mostly non-Africans. In 2002, the AU's budget was approximately $43 million. By 2015, it had grown to about $417 million. But here's the shocking part. Roughly 70% of the AU's budget came from foreign donors. The European Union, the United States, China, Gaddafi's Libya contributed significantly, but most African nations paid minimal dues. Some didn't pay at all. This created a fundamental contradiction. An organization meant to assert African independence was financially dependent on foreign powers, and whoever pays the bills has influence. European donors, for example, funded peacekeeping operations but attached conditions, reports, audits, alignment with European priorities. The AU couldn't plan long-term because funding was unpredictable and came with strings. In response, the AU eventually implemented the Kaberuka Initiative, named after Donald Kaberuka, which proposed a 0.2% levy on imports to fund the AU independently. By 2016, this was generating significant revenue, but for the first crucial decade, the AU was financially compromised. This is rarely discussed, but it explains why the AU sometimes seemed to echo Western priorities rather than African ones. Muammar Gaddafi was the AU's biggest champion and its biggest problem. Between 2002 and 2011, Gaddafi used AU summits as his personal stage. He arrived with elaborate motorcades, stayed in luxury tents, and delivered rambling speeches about African unity. He pushed constantly for his United States of Africa vision, one government, one army, him as a central figure. Other African leaders found him exhausting. His grandstanding disrupted proceedings. His interference in other countries' affairs created diplomatic nightmares, but his money kept flowing, funding AU projects, bailing out struggling nations, building infrastructure. In 2009, Gaddafi was elected as chairperson of the AU, a largely ceremonial rotating position. He used it to push his agenda harder, proposing a continental government with himself as its leader. Most African leaders resisted. They had learned from history. Giving one person too much power was dangerous. Then came 2011. The Arab Spring reached Libya. Rebels challenged Gaddafi's rule. NATO intervened, bombing Libyan government forces. The AU issued statements calling for dialogue, but NATO ignored them. The AU watched as one of its member states was attacked by foreign powers, and it could do nothing. Gaddafi was killed in October 2011. With him died the most forceful voice for rapid African integration. But his death also revealed an uncomfortable truth. The AU's biggest benefactor had been a dictator whom many Africans despised. What did that say about the organization? There's a question the AU has never fully answered. Could it have prevented the Rwandan genocide? The genocide happened in 1994, 8 years before the AU existed. The OAU did nothing, claimed non-interference, respected sovereignty, watched as 800,000 people died in 100 days. The AU was created in part because of Rwanda. Its constitutive act includes Article 4H, the right of the Union to intervene in a member state pursuant to a decision of the Assembly in respect of grave circumstances, namely war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. This was revolutionary. The AU could override sovereignty to stop mass atrocities. But here's what's rarely discussed. Rwanda itself became skeptical of the AU. After the genocide, Rwanda rebuilt under Paul Kagame's leadership. Kagame believed African institutions had failed his people. He developed a philosophy, self-reliance above all. Rwanda would depend on no one. When the AU called for solidarity, Rwanda participated but kept its distance. When AU peacekeeping missions faltered, Rwanda often deployed its own forces instead. Acting unilaterally, the country that inspired the AU's intervention principle became one of its most independent members. The irony is profound. The African Union has 4 official languages: English, French, Arabic, and Portuguese. Notice what's missing: African languages. Swahili, spoken by over 100 million people across East Africa, isn't an official AU language. Hausa, spoken by 70 million in West Africa, isn't official. Amharic, spoken in Ethiopia, the AU's headquarters, isn't official. This reflects a deeper truth. The AU is built on colonial foundations. Its borders are colonial. Its official languages are colonial. Even its vision of statehood, modern nation states with presidents and parliaments, is colonial. There's a hidden tension in Pan-Africanism. It seeks to unite Africa against colonialism while using structures and concepts inherited from colonialism. Some African intellectuals argue that true African unity requires decolonizing African minds, returning to indigenous systems of governance, economics, and social organization. But the AU doesn't seriously engage with this. It operates within the post-colonial framework, trying to make it work better rather than replace it entirely. This philosophical contradiction is rarely acknowledged in official AU discourse. Africa still has kingdoms. Morocco is a monarchy. Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, is ruled by King Mswati III. Lesotho has a king. Traditional kingdoms exist within nations like Nigeria, Ghana, Uganda, and South Africa. The AU doesn't know what to do with them. The organization is built around modern nation states, but millions of Africans still identify first with their ethnic group or traditional kingdom, not their country. In some places, traditional leaders wield more legitimacy than elected officials. They mediate disputes, maintain customs, and command loyalty, yet they have no formal role in the AU system. This creates a disconnect. The AU claims to represent African peoples, but it only engages with one form of authority, the modern state. Traditional authorities, which have existed for centuries, are invisible in the continental vision. A truly representative African Union would need to reconcile modern and traditional governance, but this conversation rarely happens. Despite its limitations, the African Union has deployed peacekeepers to some of Africa's worst conflicts. Between 2002 and today, the AU has deployed missions to Burundi, AMIB, helping transition from civil war to peace. Sudan, Darfur, AMIS, attempting to protect civilians, later transitioned to UN-AU hybrid mission. Somalia, AMISOM, later ATMIS, fighting Al-Shabaab militants, stabilizing the government. Central African Republic, MISCA, responding to sectarian violence. The Gambia, supporting ECOWAS intervention to enforce election results in 2017. These missions saved lives. AMISOM in Somalia prevented the country from becoming a failed state entirely controlled by extremists. AU peacekeepers in Burundi helped end a brutal civil war. But AU peacekeeping faces chronic problems, funding shortages, missions are underfunded, undersupplied, and sometimes go months without paying soldiers. Capability gaps, a lack of training, equipment, and logistics compared to UN or NATO forces, mandate confusion, unclear rules of engagement, political interference from member states, accountability issues. Some AU peacekeepers have been accused of human rights abuses themselves. The AU's most successful interventions have been when regional organizations like ECOWAS take the lead, with the AU providing political backing. When the AU tries to lead directly, results are mixed. Still, the principle matters. Africans solving African problems. The AU has demonstrated that Africa can deploy its own forces to address its own crises. That's progress compared to the OAU's passivity. One of the AU's most tangible impacts has been on democratic norms. The principle of rejecting unconstitutional changes of government has become established. When coups happen, the AU suspends the country. This doesn't always restore democracy immediately, but it signals that coups are unacceptable. Since 2002, the AU has suspended at least 15 member states following coups or unconstitutional power transitions, refused to recognize governments that come to power through force. sent mediation teams to countries facing constitutional crises, monitored elections, and called out fraud in some cases. This is significant. In the OAU era, coups were routine and accepted. Now they carry consequences, but the AU's democracy promotion has limits. It reacts to coups, but struggles with authoritarian regimes that maintain a veneer of legitimacy. Presidents who rig elections, change constitutions to stay in power, or suppress opposition rarely face AU sanctions. Countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Cameroon, and Equatorial Guinea have leaders who have ruled for decades through managed elections. The AU criticizes them quietly but takes no action. The AU can punish sudden unconstitutional changes but can't address slow authoritarian drift. Economic integration was one of the AU's founding goals. Progress has been slow but real. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, launched in 2019, is the AU's greatest economic achievement. It creates the world's largest free trade zone by number of countries. 54 African nations representing 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. AfCFTA aims to remove tariffs on 90% of goods, facilitate movement of people and capital, and boost intra-African trade. If successful, it could transform African economies from colonial-era extractive models to integrated industrial economies. But barriers remain. Infrastructure deficits, roads, railways, ports connecting African countries are inadequate. Non-tariff barriers, bureaucracy, corruption, and regulations still make cross-border trade difficult. Political will, some leaders fear competition will hurt local industries. Implementation gaps, signing agreements is easy, enforcement is hard. Still, progress is visible. Regional economic communities like ECOWAS have removed visa requirements for citizens traveling between member states. The East African community has a common passport. Cross-border infrastructure projects, railways, highways, power grids are being built. The vision of economic integration is alive, even if realization is slow. Perhaps the AU's most underestimated impact is on African identity. For centuries, colonial powers told Africans they were divided by tribe, by language, by region. Colonial education systems taught African children that their history began with European contact, that Africa had no civilization, no achievements, no unity. The African Union, despite its flaws, represents a counter-narrative. Africa is one. Africans share a common history, common struggles, and a common destiny. This psychological shift matters. A young person in Kenya now can see themselves as not just Kenyan, not just East African, but African. The AU passport, issued to diplomats and their officials, bears the words African Union above any national identity. African culture is increasingly crossing borders. Music from Nigeria's Afrobeats scene dominates charts across the continent. Films from Ghana, South Africa, and Nigeria circulate widely. Athletes compete under their national flags but are celebrated as African heroes. The AU hasn't created this Pan-African identity alone, but it has provided institutional backing for it. It has made Africa a legitimate political category, not just a geographical one. Before the AU, African countries often spoke with 50 different voices on the world stage. Colonial powers and superpowers exploited these divisions. The AU gives Africa a collective voice, however imperfect. At the United Nations, the African group coordinates positions on climate change, trade negotiations, international security. Africa increasingly speaks as a bloc. This has yielded results. Africa secured permanent representation in G20 discussions. African priorities, debt relief, fair trade, climate justice get more attention. Multinational corporations and foreign governments now negotiate with the AU Commission, not just individual countries. But challenges remain. Africa's voice is only as strong as its unity. When African countries disagree, as they often do, the collective voice weakens, and Africa still lacks permanent representation on the UN Security Council, despite repeated AU demands for reform. Still, the trend is clear. Africa is moving from being acted upon to being an actor. The AU is central to that transformation. One impact rarely discussed is the institutional culture the AU has created. Thousands of African diplomats, technocrats, and civil servants now work within AU structures. They meet regularly, develop personal relationships, build networks across borders. This creates a class of professionals who think continentally, not just nationally. The AU has also created norms and standards. When countries write new constitutions, they reference AU principles. When regional courts make decisions, they cite AU human rights frameworks. When civil society groups advocate for change, they invoke AU commitments. This normative power, the ability to set standards for what is acceptable, may be the AU's most lasting legacy. So what does the African Union really represent? On paper, it's an intergovernmental organization, bureaucratic, political, often frustrating. It has achieved some successes and suffered many failures. It deploys peacekeepers that sometimes work and sometimes don't. It promotes norms that sometimes stick and sometimes don't. It's perpetually underfunded, sometimes ineffective, and frequently contradictory. But here's the deeper truth. The African Union represents something profound: Africa's refusal to accept the world as it was handed to them. Think about what colonialism did. It told Africans they were inferior. It divided them artificially. It extracted their resources and returned nothing. It left them with borders designed to keep them weak, economies designed to serve foreign interests, and political systems designed to fail. The African Union is Africa's declaration. We will not accept this. We will rewrite our story. We will unite what you divided. We will reclaim what you took. We will define ourselves, not be defined by you. This is what makes the AU significant even when it fails. Every AU summit, every peacekeeping mission, every trade agreement, every instance of standing together, it's an act of resistance against a colonial legacy that tried to make African unity impossible. The question isn't whether the AU has achieved its full vision. It hasn't. The question is whether the vision itself matters. And it does. Because here's what critics miss. Nation building takes time. The United States, the model everyone points to, fought a civil war 85 years after independence. The European Union, another model, took decades to develop and is still struggling with unity. China's current form emerged after centuries of fragmentation and civil war. Africa is attempting continental integration barely 60 years after most countries gained independence. The artificial colonial borders are still fresh. The wounds of exploitation are still healing. The economic dependency is still being unwound. In that context, the African Union's mere existence is remarkable. That 54 countries with different languages, cultures, political systems, and economic interests can sit together and negotiate a common future. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary. The big lesson of the African Union is this: healing from colonialism is not a policy, it's a process. Unity is not a destination, it's a practice. And Africa's story is not written by its past. It's being written by its choices. The African Union is Africa choosing itself. The African Union in 2002 was born from hope and desperation. Hope that Africa could be more than the sum of its divided parts, and desperation born from decades of watching those divisions exploited. Today, more than 2 decades later, the AU is still evolving. It has expanded from peacekeeping to economic integration. It has launched the African Continental Free Trade Area. It has responded to coups and crises. It has given Africa a collective voice, however imperfect. But the dream of true continental unity, one Africa, one voice, one future, remains incomplete, as perhaps it always will be. Perhaps the point was never to achieve perfect unity, but to keep choosing unity despite the reasons to divide. What's clear is this: the story of the African Union is the story of Africa's post-colonial journey. Every success reveals how far Africa has come. Every failure reveals how far there is to go. And every choice to stay together, despite the pressures to fracture, is a victory against a history designed to keep Africans apart. The African Union is far from perfect, but it exists. And in a world that spent centuries betting against African unity, that existence itself is revolutionary. If this story moved you, if it taught you something you didn't know, if it made you see Africa differently, please subscribe to Africa Hidden History. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And in the comments, tell us, do you believe the African Union can achieve true continental unity? What would that unity look like? What obstacles do you think are most difficult to overcome? Next episode, we are diving into another hidden chapter of African history. Until then, remember, Africa's story is still being written, and you're part of it. Imagine a man so wealthy that his generosity crushed entire economies. A king whose single journey caused inflation that lasted for decades. A ruler who commanded so much gold that European mapmakers drew him, sitting on a throne of pure wealth, dominating the African continent. His name was Mansa Musa, and in 1324 he embarked on a pilgrimage that would change the world's understanding of Africa forever. When he passed through Cairo with a caravan of 60,000 men, 12,000 slaves dressed in Persian silk, and 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold, the Egyptian economy collapsed under the weight of his spending. Historians estimate his wealth at over $400 billion in today's money, making him possibly the richest human being who ever lived. But this is not just a story about gold. This is the story of Mali, an empire that stretched across West Africa like a golden colossus, an empire built on intelligence, trade, faith, and power, an empire that the world forgot, but one that shaped the course of African and global history. Stay with us as we uncover the hidden truth of Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire. Welcome to Africa Hidden History. Today we journey back to the 14th century, to the heart of West Africa, where one of the most powerful empires in human history thrived in splendor and sophistication. This documentary explores the reign of Mansa Musa, the 10th Mansa, or emperor, of the Mali Empire, who ruled from 1312 to 1337. We will walk through the golden cities of Timbuktu and Gao, stand in the great halls of Niani, and follow the legendary pilgrimage to Mecca that announced Mali's presence to the entire Islamic world. But more than that, we will examine the Mali Empire itself, how it rose to dominate West Africa, how it controlled the gold and sword trade that fueled medieval economies, and how it became a center of learning, culture, and Islamic scholarship that rivaled any institution in Europe or the Middle East. We will meet the architects of this empire, the scholars who filled its libraries, the merchants who walked its trade routes, and the warriors who defended its borders. And we will uncover the hidden truths, the stories that textbooks ignore, the African innovations that shaped global trade, and the legacy that continues to echo through West Africa today. This is not a story of savagery or backwardness. This is a story of brilliance, wealth, faith, and power. This is the story of how Africa stood at the center of the medieval world. Let us begin. The year is 1312. Across the world, great civilizations rise and fall. In Europe, the Middle Ages grip the continent. The Black Death looms on the horizon. Kings fight over territories. The Catholic Church dominates spiritual and political life. Cities are small, dirty, and disease-ridden. Most Europeans cannot read or write. In the Middle East, the Mamluk Sultanate controls Egypt and Syria. The Abbasid Caliphate has fragmented. Islamic scholarship flourishes in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. The Mongol invasions have reshaped Asia. In China, the Yuan dynasty under Mongol rule connects the Silk Road from east to west. Marco Polo's accounts of the East fascinate European courts. And in West Africa, an empire rises that will eclipse them all in wealth and grandeur, the Mali Empire. To understand Mali, you must first understand the land. Picture the Sahel, a vast belt of semi-arid grassland stretching across Africa, just south of the Sahara Desert. Here, the landscape shifts between desert sands and fertile river valleys. The Niger River cuts through this region like a lifeline, bringing water, fish, and transportation to millions. This is a land of contrasts. Scorching days and cool nights, rainy seasons that turn dust into mud, dry seasons that crack the earth. Baobab trees rise like ancient sentinels. Villages cluster around water sources. Traders traverse paths worn smooth by centuries of caravans. To the north lies the Sahara, endless, unforgiving, deadly to those unprepared. But for those who know its secrets, the desert is a highway. Trans-Saharan trade routes connect West Africa to North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Islamic world. To the south lie forests rich with resources, cola nuts, ivory, and exotic goods that northern merchants crave. And beneath the soil, in the riverbeds, in hidden mines known only to local peoples, lies gold. Unimaginable quantities of gold. This gold will make Mali the wealthiest empire on earth. Long before Mali, this region saw the rise of great kingdoms. The Ghana Empire dominated West Africa from the 6th to the 11th centuries. Despite its name, ancient Ghana was located northwest of modern Ghana, in what is now Mauritania and Mali. Ghana controlled the gold-sought trade and grew fabulously wealthy. Arab scholars wrote of Ghana's king holding court in a pavilion surrounded by horses draped in gold cloth, with pages carrying gold-hilted swords and shields of gold. But Ghana fell. Overextension, internal strife, and invasion by the Almoravids weakened the empire. By the 13th century, Ghana had collapsed into smaller kingdoms. From the ruins, a new power emerged, the Soso kingdom under the Sosera king Sumanguru Kante, who conquered the fragmented territories and ruled through fear and iron. But Sumanguru's tyranny would not last. The story of Mali begins with a prophecy and a young prince named Sundiata Keita. According to the oral tradition passed down by griots, the historian storytellers of West Africa, Sundiata was born around 1217 in the small kingdom of Kangaba. His mother was Sogolon, often called the Buffalo Woman. Prophecy declared that Sundiata would become a great king. But young Sundiata was sickly and could not walk. His people mocked him. When his father died, rivals drove Sundiata and his mother into exile. Years passed. Sundiata grew strong, and when Sumanguru Kante conquered Kangaba and oppressed the Mandinka people, the exiled prince returned. In 1235, at the Battle of Kirina, Sundiata defeated Sumanguru using both military strategy and psychological warfare. Legend says that Sundiata discovered Sumanguru's weakness, a fear of the spear of a white rooster, and used it to break the sorcerer king's power. Sundiata united the Mandinka clans and established the Mali Empire with its capital at Niani. He created the Kurukan Fuga, a constitution that established laws, promoted trade, and protected the environment. Sundiata ruled until around 1255, laying the foundation for an empire that would dominate West Africa for centuries. By the time Mansa Musa ascended to power in 1312, the Mali Empire had grown into a giant. Mali stretched over 1,000 miles from the Atlantic coast to beyond the Niger Bend. It encompassed modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, and parts of Niger and Burkina Faso. Millions of people lived under Mali's rule. The empire controlled two precious commodities that the medieval world desperately needed: gold and salt. The gold came from the Bambouk and Bure gold fields, rich deposits that produced half of the world's gold supply during this period. European and Islamic currencies depended on West African gold. Without it, their economies would collapse. The salt came from mines deep in the Sahara, particularly Tagaza, where slabs of salt were cut from the earth and transported south. In the hot, humid regions of West Africa, salt was essential for preserving food, maintaining health, and seasoning meals. It was so valuable that it was traded pound for pound with gold in some markets. Mali sat at the crossroads of these trade routes. Caravans from North Africa brought salt, cloth, horses, and books. Caravans from the south brought gold, ivory, kola nuts, and enslaved people. In cities like Timbuktu, Gao, Jane, and Niani, merchants from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe conducted business. Mali grew wealthy beyond imagination. Mansa Musa's full title was Musa Keita I. He was born around 1280, a member of the Keita dynasty that Sundiata had established. How Musa came to power remains debated. According to some accounts, the previous Mansa, Abubakar II, was obsessed with exploring the Atlantic Ocean. He organized a fleet of 200 ships to sail west and discover what lay beyond the horizon. Abubakar II never returned. In his absence, Musa, serving as deputy, became Mansa. Mansa Musa was intelligent, devout, and ambitious. He was a practicing Muslim in an empire where Islam and traditional African religions coexisted. He understood both the spiritual importance of Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, and the political importance of displaying Mali's wealth and power to the Islamic world. He ruled with a combination of religious devotion, strategic intelligence, and overwhelming generosity. His reign would last 25 years and transform Mali into a legend. The Mali Empire was not a chaotic collection of tribes. It was a sophisticated state with a complex government structure. At the top sat the Mansa, the emperor whose word was law. But the Mansa did not rule alone. Below him were the provincial governors called Farbas, who managed distant territories and collected taxes. Each province maintained local traditions while remaining loyal to the empire. The royal council consisted of nobles, religious leaders, and military commanders who advised the Mansa on matters of state. Griots served as historians, advisors, and diplomats, preserving oral traditions and negotiating between kingdoms. The military was organized and disciplined with cavalry units, infantry, and archers. Mali's army numbered in the tens of thousands and could be mobilized quickly to defend borders or expand territory. A judicial system based on both Islamic law and traditional customs maintained order. Markets were regulated, trade routes were protected, crimes were punished. This was not a primitive society. This was a functioning empire with bureaucracy, laws, and institutions. Walk through the markets of Timbuktu and you would hear a dozen languages: Arabic, Tamashek, Mandinka, Fulani, Songhai, and more. Merchants from North Africa arrived with caravans of camels, bringing salt, dates, cloth, horses, and precious manuscripts. They wore flowing robes and turbans, their faces veiled against the desert sun. Wangara merchants, Mandinka traders who controlled the gold supply, operated in secrecy. They never revealed the location of the gold fields. When trading, they used the silent barter system, leaving gold at designated spots, allowing buyers to place goods in exchange and returning later to collect their trade items. This mystery kept Mali's gold sources hidden from foreign powers. Dula merchants, a Mandinka subgroup specializing in long-distance trade, established commercial networks across West Africa, spreading Islam and creating trade diasporas in distant cities. Jewish and Berber traders traveled from North Africa and the Mediterranean, seeking gold and ivory. These merchants did not just trade goods, they traded ideas, technologies, religious beliefs, and cultural practices. Timbuktu became a crossroads of civilization. Mali's wealth bought something more valuable than gold: knowledge. Mansa Musa was a devoted Muslim, and he invested heavily in Islamic education and scholarship. He built mosques and madrasas, Islamic schools, throughout the empire. In Timbuktu, the Sankore Mosque became one of the world's great centers of learning. Scholars from across the Islamic world traveled to Timbuktu to study and teach. The University of Sankore rivaled universities in Cairo, Baghdad, and Cordoba. Students studied the Quran, Islamic law, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, and literature. Libraries housed thousands of manuscripts, books on science, philosophy, poetry, and theology, many written by African scholars. One famous scholar was Ahmad Baba al-Masufi. Though he lived after Mansa Musa's time, he represents the intellectual tradition Musa established. These scholars wrote treatises, debated theology, and preserved knowledge. Islamic judges called Qadis administered justice based on Sharia law, while traditional African customs were respected in local disputes. This intellectual flourishing occurred in cities that Europeans would later dismiss as primitive. The irony is bitter. While European monks copied texts in cold monasteries, African scholars debated philosophy under West African skies. But what of the common people, the farmers, artisans, herders, and laborers who formed the backbone of Mali's society? Most Malians were farmers, growing millet, sorghum, rice, and vegetables along the Niger River. They raised cattle, goats, and chickens. They fished in rivers and lakes. Our artisans crafted beautiful objects. Blacksmiths forged tools and weapons. Weavers created intricate textiles. Potters shaped clay vessels. Leather workers made bags and shoes. And goldsmiths created jewelry of stunning beauty. Women played vital roles, farming, trading in local markets, raising children, and maintaining households. Some women held significant influence, particularly in matrilineal societies, where descent was traced through the mother. Enslaved people also existed in Mali, captured in warfare or born into servitude. However, slavery in medieval Mali differed from the brutal plantation slavery that would later devastate Africa. Enslaved people could own property, marry, and sometimes buy their freedom. Some rose to positions of authority. Life for common Malians was hard but not hopeless. The empire provided stability, protection from raiders, and opportunities for trade. Compared to the chaos of earlier periods, Mali offered peace. When Mansa Musa assumed power in 1312, he inherited a vast but complex empire. His first priority was consolidation. He strengthened administrative control over distant provinces. He appointed loyal governors. He ensured trade routes remained safe and profitable. Mali's wealth continued to grow. Gold flowed from the mines. Salt caravans traversed the Sahara. Timbuktu and Gao flourished as commercial hubs. But Mansa Musa wanted more than wealth. He wanted recognition. He wanted the Islamic world to acknowledge Mali as a great Muslim empire. And he wanted to fulfill his religious obligation, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every able Muslim should undertake once in their lifetime. In 1324, Mansa Musa made the decision that would immortalize his name. He would journey to Mecca. Preparing for such a journey required months of planning. Mansa Musa would not travel alone. He would bring thousands of people, soldiers for protection, officials to manage affairs, scholars for religious guidance, servants to handle logistics, and hundreds of enslaved people to carry supplies. He would bring gifts, vast quantities of gold to distribute as charity, as the Islamic tradition demanded. He would bring horses, camels, and provisions for the long journey across the Sahara, through Egypt and into Arabia. Across Mali, craftsmen prepared goods for the journey. Goldsmiths melted and shaped gold into bars and ingots. Weavers created fine garments. Leather workers made bags and saddles. Mansa Musa selected his entourage carefully. Trusted advisors, military commanders, religious leaders, and representatives from major provinces. This pilgrimage would showcase Mali's wealth and unity. By early 1324, the caravan was ready. Picture the caravan as it departs from Niani in early 1324. At the front rides Mansa Musa, dressed in flowing robes of the finest fabric. His turban wrapped expertly, his bearing regal and commanding. Behind him stretches a procession that defies imagination. 60,000 men, including soldiers, officials, merchants, and servants, with 12,000 enslaved people, each dressed in Persian silk and brocade, some carrying golden staffs. 80 camels, each bearing 300 pounds of gold dust in leather bags. Hundreds more camels carrying food, water, tents, and supplies. Horses from North Africa prized for their speed and endurance. Cattle and goats to be slaughtered for food along the way. This is not just a pilgrimage, this is a statement. The caravan moves north toward the Sahara. The journey will take months, crossing deserts, navigating by stars, stopping at oases, enduring sandstorms and scorching heat. Griots sing songs praising Mansa Musa. Drummers set the rhythm of the march. Soldiers scout ahead for bandits or hostile tribes. At each stop, Mansa Musa displays his wealth. He gives gold to local rulers, distributes arms to the poor, commissions the construction of mosques. The legend of the Golden King spreads ahead of him like wildfire. In July 1324, Mansa Musa's caravan arrives in Cairo, the jewel of the Islamic world. Cairo is a city of minarets and markets, palaces, and poverty. It is the capital of the Mamluk Sultanate, one of the most powerful Muslim states. Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad rules Egypt, and he expects foreign rulers to show him respect. But Mansa Musa is no ordinary ruler. When officials invite him to meet the Sultan, protocol demands that Musa prostrate himself before al-Nasir Muhammad. Mansa Musa refuses. He explains that he prostrates only before God, never before another man. This causes a diplomatic incident. The Egyptians are offended, but Mansa Musa's reputation precedes him. This man commands unimaginable wealth. The Sultan decides to overlook the insult. Mansa Musa stays in Cairo for 3 months. During this time, he purchases supplies, meets with scholars, and most famously, distributes gold with such extravagance that he crashes the Egyptian economy. He gives gold to officials, beggars, merchants, religious leaders, anyone he encounters. He commissions buildings. He buys goods at inflated prices, paying in gold without haggling. Contemporary historians record that so much gold flooded Cairo that its value plummeted, the price of goods skyrocketed, inflation raged. The economy would not recover for over a decade. One historian writes that Mansa Musa left Cairo with the greatest respect and admiration, but also with a trail of economic chaos. From Cairo, the caravan travels to the Hijaz, the region of Arabia containing Islam's holiest cities, Medina and Mecca. In Medina, Mansa Musa visits the Prophet Muhammad's mosque. He prays, he gives charity, he meets with religious scholars and discusses Islamic theology. Then the caravan moves toward Mecca for the Hajj rituals. Mecca sits in a valley surrounded by mountains. The Kaaba, the cube-shaped structure covered in black cloth, stands at the center of the Grand Mosque. This is the direction Muslims face when they pray, the spiritual heart of Islam. Mansa Musa performs the tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times. He walks between the hills of Safa and Marwa, retracing Hagar's desperate search for water. He stands on the plain of Arafat, praying and reflecting. He throws stones at pillars representing Satan. These rituals connect him to millions of Muslims across history, from the Prophet Muhammad to the poorest pilgrim. For Mansa Musa, this is the pinnacle of his life, a moment of spiritual fulfillment and connection to God. But even here, his generosity is legendary. He distributes gold to Meccan officials, funds repairs to infrastructure, and supports poor pilgrims. The return journey begins in 1325. Mansa Musa has spent so much gold that he now faces a problem. He needs money for the journey home. In a moment of irony, the richest man in the world takes out loans from Egyptian merchants at high interest rates. This is the only recorded instance of Mansa Musa borrowing money. The caravan retraces its steps through Egypt. In Cairo, Mansa Musa attempts to stabilize the economy by buying back gold at inflated prices, partially reversing the damage. The journey across the Sahara is slower now, as the caravan has fewer resources, but Mansa Musa brings treasures of a different kind. Scholars, architects, poets, and religious leaders whom he recruited from Egypt and Arabia. Among them is Abu Ishaq as-Sahili, a renowned architect and poet from Granada, Spain. Mansa Musa convinces as-Sahili to return to Mali and help build mosques and palaces. After months of travel, the caravan finally returns to Mali in 1325. The pilgrimage is complete. Mansa Musa returns to Mali changed. He has seen the great cities of the Islamic world, Cairo, Mecca, Medina. He has met scholars, architects, and thinkers. He wants Mali to match their splendor. With Abu Ishaq al-Sahili's guidance, Mansa Musa embarks on an ambitious building program. In Timbuktu, the Jingwereba Mosque rises, a masterpiece of Sudano-Sahelian architecture with thick mud brick walls, wooden support beams protruding like ribs, and a towering minaret. This mosque still stands today, over 700 years later. The Sankore Mosque and University expand. Libraries fill with manuscripts. Students from across West Africa travel to Timbuktu to study. In Gao, another great mosque is constructed, cementing the city's importance as a commercial and spiritual center. Mansa Musa builds palaces, administrative buildings, and caravanserais, inns where merchants can rest and trade safely. He encourages agriculture, ensuring food security. He maintains the trade routes, providing military protection for caravans. He establishes diplomatic relations with North African states, exchanging ambassadors and gifts. Under Mansa Musa, Timbuktu becomes synonymous with wealth and learning. European and Arab scholars write about this legendary city in the heart of Africa, a place of God and knowledge. As Mansa Musa ages, he focuses on ensuring Mali's stability after his death. He appoints his son, Maghan, as heir and trains him in governance. He maintains strong relationships with provincial governors, ensuring their loyalty. He continues to support Islamic scholarship and infrastructure. He mediates disputes. He prays daily, maintaining the deep faith that defined his reign. Contemporary accounts describe an empire at its zenith, prosperous, stable, and respected throughout the Islamic world. In 1337, after a reign of 25 years, Mansa Musa dies. The exact circumstances of his death are not recorded, but his legacy is undeniable. He transformed Mali from a powerful regional kingdom into an empire whose fame reached Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. His son Magan inherits the throne, but the empire will never again reach the heights it achieved under Mansa Musa.
For centuries, European historians portrayed Africa as a backward, primitive, uncivilized place, a dark continent waiting for European enlightenment. This narrative is a lie. While Europe languished in the Middle Ages, African empires like Mali thrived. Timbuktu's libraries contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. The University of Sankore educated students when most Europeans were illiterate. Mali's administrative systems, legal codes, and economic structures were sophisticated and effective. The empire maintained peace over a vast territory for centuries. European scholars knew about Mali. The Catalan Atlas of 1375, a famous medieval map, depicts Mansa Musa sitting on a throne, holding a golden orb, with text describing him as the richest and most distinguished ruler of this region. But later, as Europe colonized Africa, these truths were buried. African achievements were erased from history textbooks. The narrative shifted to justify exploitation. Africans were painted as savages needing European civilization. Mansa Musa's story destroys this myth. His Mali was wealthy, educated, and organized, a beacon of civilization in its time.
One of Mali's greatest secrets was the silent barter system used by the Wangara merchants to trade gold. The gold fields of Bambouk and Bure were hidden from outsiders. To protect these sources, the Wangara developed a system of trade that required no direct contact. Merchants from the north would arrive at designated trading spots. They would display their goods, salt cloth, horses, and beat drums to signal their presence. Then they would withdraw out of sight. Wangara traders would emerge, examine the goods, and leave gold next to items they wanted. Then they would withdraw. The northern merchants would return. If satisfied with the amount of gold, they would take it and leave the goods. If not, they would withdraw again, and the Wangara would add more gold or remove it. This process continued until both parties were satisfied. No words were spoken, no locations revealed. The Wangara gold sources remained secret for centuries. This system demonstrates African innovation and economic sophistication, a peaceful, efficient method of trade that protected valuable resources while facilitating commerce. History often forgets women, and Mali's history is no exception. But women played crucial roles in the Mali Empire. Queens and royal women wielded significant influence. Mansa Musa's senior wife managed the royal household and advised on important matters. In matrilineal societies within the empire, descent and inheritance passed through the mother's line. Women controlled property and had economic power. Women dominated local markets, trading food, cloth, pottery, and other goods. They were farmers, artisans, and entrepreneurs. Griot women, female griots, preserved oral traditions, sang at ceremonies, and advised leaders. Islamic education was not limited to men. While fewer in number, some women studied at madrasas and became scholars. The erasure of women from Mali's history is not because they were absent, it's because historians failed to record their contributions. Reconstructing their stories requires reading between the lines, listening to oral traditions, and acknowledging the biases of written sources. We cannot discuss Mali without addressing slavery, a painful and complex topic. Slavery existed in the Mali Empire. Enslaved people were captured in warfare, sold by other kingdoms, or born into servitude. Mansa Musa's caravan included 12,000 enslaved people. However, slavery in medieval Mali differed significantly from the transatlantic slave trade that would later devastate Africa. In Mali, enslaved people could own property, marry, and sometimes purchase freedom. They worked as domestic servants, agricultural laborers, soldiers, and even administrators. Some enslaved people rose to positions of power and influence. This does not excuse slavery. It was still an unjust system that stripped people of freedom. But understanding the differences matters. The transatlantic slave trade, which began in the 15th century, was fundamentally different, industrial in scale, racial in justification, and brutal beyond measure. Millions of Africans were captured, chained, shipped across the ocean, and are worked to death on plantations. Mali's internal slavery was wrong, but it was not the racialized genocidal system that colonialism brought. This distinction is important for understanding African history without excusing injustice. Mansa Musa's death in 1337 marked the beginning of Mali's slow decline. His son Magan ruled briefly but lacked his father's strength and vision. He was succeeded by his uncle Suleiman, who maintained stability for a time. But internal conflicts arose. Provincial governors grew powerful and independent. The empire fragmented. External pressures mounted. The Mossi kingdom raided from the south. Tuareg Berbers attacked from the north, eventually capturing Timbuktu in 1433. The Songhai Empire, once a vassal state within Mali, grew powerful under leaders like Sunni Ali Bey. In 1464, Sunni Ali began conquering Mali's territories, establishing Songhai as the new dominant power in West Africa. By the 16th century, Mali had shrunk to a small kingdom, a shadow of its former glory. The reasons for decline were multiple: succession disputes, overextension, loss of control over trade routes, and the rise of rival powers. But Mali's legacy endured. The cities it built, the trade networks it established, and the intellectual traditions it fostered continued under Songhai and beyond. Mali's economic impact on the medieval world cannot be overstated. West African gold fueled the economies of Europe and the Islamic world. Without it, European kingdoms could not mint coins, pay armies, or conduct trade. The Italian city-states, Venice, Florence, Genoa, depended on gold that ultimately came from Mali's mines. The trans-Saharan trade routes that Mali controlled connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean, creating a global economy centuries before European colonial expansion. When Mali declined, the disruption of gold supplies contributed to economic instability in Europe and North Africa. Songhai maintained the trade for a time, but by the 16th century, European maritime exploration sought new routes to African gold, bypassing the Sahara. The slave trade that followed was in part driven by Europe's desire to control African resources directly, including gold, ivory, and human labor. Mali's wealth reshaped the world, but that wealth also made Africa a target for exploitation. Timbuktu became a symbol, a city of learning, wealth, and mystery. The manuscripts preserved in Timbuktu's libraries represent one of Africa's greatest intellectual treasures. These documents contain knowledge on medicine, mathematics, astronomy, law, history, and theology written by African scholars. In recent decades, efforts to preserve these manuscripts have revealed the depth of African scholarship. Families in Timbuktu hid manuscripts during wars and occupations, protecting them from destruction. These texts prove that Africa had rich intellectual traditions long before colonialism. African scholars wrote poetry, he debated philosophy and made scientific discoveries. Mansa Musa's investment in education created institutions that lasted centuries and influenced West African culture profoundly. Islam became deeply rooted in West Africa, blending with traditional beliefs to create unique cultural practices, Sufi brotherhoods, musical traditions, architectural styles, and social structures. The griots oral traditions, which preserved Mali's history, continue today. Songs about Sundiata and Mansa Musa are still sung in West Africa. Mali established a model of governance, centralized authority balanced with local autonomy, laws that protected trade and maintained order, and diplomacy that built alliances. Subsequent empires, Songhai, Kanimbonu, and others, learned from Mali's successes and failures. Modern West African nations inherited borders drawn by colonizers, but the memory of Mali remains powerful. The Republic of Mali, established in 1960, takes its name from the ancient empire, a conscious choice to honor that legacy. The national pride in Mansa Musa and Sundiata Keita is profound. Statues, currency, and national symbols reference the empire. Mali's model of multi-ethnic governance, bringing together Mandinka, Fulani, Songhai, Tuareg, and other groups, offers lessons for modern African nations struggling with ethnic conflicts and political instability. The principle that empires rise through trade, diplomacy, and education rather than just military conquest remains relevant today. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage had profound religious consequences. It announced to the Islamic world that West Africa was not peripheral but central to the Muslim community. African Muslims were not recent converts, but practitioners of a faith deeply rooted in their societies. The mosques Mansa Musa built became centers of Islamic practice that have endured for centuries. The Jingwe Reba Mosque in Timbuktu still holds prayers today. His patronage of Islamic scholarship established West Africa as a major center of Islamic learning. Scholars from Timbuktu traveled to Cairo, Mecca, and beyond, contributing to global Islamic intellectual discourse. The blending of Islam with African traditions created unique expressions of faith, Sufi practices infused with local customs, architectural styles adapted to West African materials and climate, and social structures that balanced Islamic law with traditional African values. Today, Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and neighboring countries remain predominantly Muslim, a legacy that traces back to empires like Mali that made Islam integral to West African identity. In recent decades, Mansa Musa has experienced a renaissance in popular consciousness. Articles declaring him the richest man in history circulate online. His story appears in history textbooks that once ignored African achievement. Documentaries, podcasts, and educational videos explore his life. This renewed interest reflects a broader movement to reclaim African history from colonial distortion. Young Africans and people of African descent worldwide take pride in Mansa Musa's story, proof that African civilizations achieved greatness long before European contact. Musicians reference Mansa Musa in lyrics, artists paint him in golden splendor. Writers imagine his world in novels and stories. The legend of Timbuktu, once synonymous with the middle of nowhere in Western imagination, is being reclaimed as a symbol of African intellectual achievement. This cultural reclamation matters because it challenges narratives that justified colonialism and slavery. It reminds the world that Africa has always been home to sophisticated civilizations, brilliant minds, and powerful empires. Mansa Musa's legacy is not just historical, it is political, cultural, and deeply personal for millions who see in his story a reflection of what Africa was and what it can be again. What can modern Africa learn from Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire? First, that Africa's wealth, gold, diamonds, oil, rare minerals, should benefit Africans. Mali controlled its resources and used them to build infrastructure, support education, and create prosperity. Today, too often, African resources enrich foreign corporations while Africans remain poor. Second, that education and knowledge are foundations of power. Mansa Musa invested in libraries, universities, and scholars. He understood that economic power without intellectual development is hollow. Modern African nations must prioritize education, preserve indigenous knowledge, and support African scholars and innovators. Third, that unity brings strength. Mali brought together diverse ethnic groups under a common political structure while respecting local traditions. Modern African nations, often divided by ethnicity and religion, can learn from this model of unity in diversity. Fourth, that Africa must tell its own stories. For too long, others have defined African history. Mansa Musa's story was nearly lost because European historians dismissed or ignored it. Africans must reclaim their narratives, preserve their histories, and celebrate their achievements. Fifth, that faith and culture can coexist. Mali blended Islam with African traditions, creating a unique civilization. This balance remains relevant in debates about religion, tradition, and modernity in contemporary Africa. The Mali Empire was not perfect. It had slavery, warfare, and inequality, but it also had brilliance, wealth, learning, and power. It proved that African civilizations could rival any in the world. That lesson echoes through time. So what is the ultimate lesson of Mansa Musa's story? It is this: Africa has always been a land of greatness. For centuries, the world has been told a lie, that Africa was backward, primitive, and uncivilized until Europeans arrived to save it. This narrative justified slavery, colonialism, and exploitation. It stripped Africans of their dignity and their history. Mansa Musa's story shatters that lie completely. He was a man who ruled an empire larger than Western Europe. A man whose wealth surpassed that of any European king. A man who built universities when most Europeans could not read. A man whose pilgrimage was so grand that it entered the historical record across 3 continents. And he was not an anomaly. He was part of a tradition. Sundiata before him, the Songhai emperors after him, the scholars of Timbuktu, the merchants who connected continents, the artisans who created beauty, the farmers who fed millions. Africa has always had history. Africa has always had civilization. Africa has always had brilliance. The tragedy is not that these things didn't exist. It's that they were hidden, erased, and denied. When we study Mansa Musa, we are not discovering something new. We are uncovering something that was buried. We are reclaiming a truth that was stolen. This matters because history shapes identity. If you believe your ancestors were primitive, you see yourself as inferior. If you know your ancestors built empires, you see yourself as capable of greatness. For young Africans, Mansa Musa's story is empowering. It says your heritage is glorious, your history is rich, you come from excellence. For the world, his story is humbling. It says Africa was never the dark continent. It was a beacon of light that the world chose to ignore. The gold that Mansa Musa distributed in Cairo was not just wealth, it was a message. It said, we are here, we are powerful, we matter. That message echoes today. Africa is rising again, economically, culturally, politically. African music dominates global charts. African writers win Nobel Prizes. African innovators create technologies that change the world. African voices demand to be heard. This is not a new beginning, this is a return. The spirit of Mansa Musa, ambitious, generous, faithful, proud, lives on in every African who refuses to be defined by others, who claims their history, who builds their future. The Mali Empire fell, but its legacy endures. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Empires may crumble, but the truth of what they achieved cannot be destroyed. Mansa Musa walked across the Sahara with 60,000 men and 80 camels bearing gold. He prayed at the Kaaba. He built mosques that stand today. He transformed his empire into a legend. He did all this to fulfill a religious duty and to announce Mali's greatness to the world. He succeeded beyond measure. 700 years later, we still speak his name. 700 years later, his story still inspires. 700 years later, the legacy of the Mali Empire still reminds us that Africa has always been and will always be a land of greatness. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Mansa Musa and the golden age of the Mali Empire. This story is one of many hidden treasures in African history. Stories of kings and queens, warriors and scholars, innovators and artists who shaped the world but whose names have been forgotten or ignored. Here at Africa Hidden History, our mission is to uncover these stories, to bring them into the light, and to remind the world of Africa's incredible past. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Give us a thumbs up if you learned something new, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear this story. Leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most about Mansa Musa's story. What other African historical figures or events should we cover next? We love hearing from you, and your suggestions help us create content that matters to our community. In our next episode, we'll explore another hidden chapter of African history, one filled with drama, courage, and untold truths. You won't want to miss it. Recommended next episode, The Kingdom of Kush. When black pharaohs ruled Egypt, or Queen Nzinga of Ndongo, the warrior queen who defied Portugal for 40 years. Until next time, remember, Africa's history is humanity's history, and the truth cannot remain hidden forever. This is Africa Hidden History. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep sharing the truth.